Hello and welcome to The Nexus. This week we are taking a look back at what was clearly the biggest story of the year and probably of next year, the coronavirus pandemic. There have now been more than 75 million reported cases of COVID-19 worldwide, and it has spread to every continent except Antarctica. So far, the virus has claimed more than 1.6 million lives and caused the worst economic downturn since World War II. We first covered the story back in February when Wuhan had just been locked down. And let's take a look now at how the world's media covered the story as the virus spread around the globe.
The coronavirus has spread to countries across the world, but officials believe that it all started in Wuhan, China.
The epicenter of the coronavirus.
Large-scale quarantines, unprecedented in size.
Well, it's never seen anything like this.
This is the epicenter of this novel coronavirus. The lockdown of Wuhan and surrounding cities continues.
Officials there say the virus is now spreading faster.
It is impossible to tell when the Wuhan coronavirus will peak.
The race is on to stop this new and still mysterious strain of coronavirus spreading.
Rail stations across the province have largely shut down. Flights have been suspended and police checkpoints have been set up on main roads.
Experts say it won't stop the virus because many had already left the area.
After the lockdown, China has been unable to control the coronavirus.
The virus, which originated in Wuhan, has spread to every region of China. And it's still spreading across a range of countries.
Countries are racing to stop it spreading.
New cases are still popping up around the world on a daily basis.
The mysterious new pneumonia virus that sickened dozens of people in the Chinese city of Wuhan has been confirmed in Thailand.
Japan has confirmed 3 new cases of the virus.
A new case in the United States.
This morning, there are 7 confirmed cases in Australia.
Here in Singapore, 2 more cases.
There are 2 cases now in England.
Canada has its first confirmed case.
This is where the first person in Germany was infected.
The Philippines has reported the first death from the new coronavirus outside of China.
It's now been declared a global health emergency.
Well, there's no shortage of alarming headlines and sometimes misleading ones too. This video of a Chinese woman eating a bat has been doing the rounds, and it's actually quite misleading because it's in the wrong place and the wrong time. Now, we're going to get to that later in the show. But first, let's bring in our guests. And in Singapore, we have Lyle Fernley, who's done a lot of research on China's so-called wet markets. We also have Dr. Eric Fagel-Ding, an epidemiologist who knows a lot about how best to stop a virus spreading. And finally, Professor Ken Steadman, who has plenty of experience in finding vaccines. Now, we're going to start with Professor Steadman, and we're going to start with some simple questions. A lot of people are asking about this particular coronavirus. It is winter in the Northern Hemisphere. A lot of people have colds. Some are going to get the flu. How do they distinguish between that and this coronavirus?
So the key is getting testing quickly. And so the first thing you want to do is you get sick very rapidly. You have usually a relatively high fever. You feel really badly. First thing to do would be to cover your face and nose and then go into your doctor and get a test.
Now, Professor Steadman, if you look back to, say, SARS or MERS, people quite interested to know if it is more dangerous or less. What are the crucial factors you look at when trying to make that assessment?
So it appears that this novel coronavirus actually has much lower mortality rate than SARS or MERS. We're still lacking a lot of data in terms of understanding that, but it looks as if the SARS virus had about a 10% mortality rate, and the MERS virus is even higher than that, probably over 30%. This new coronavirus, again, the numbers are not completely clear, but it does look as if it's around 1% to 2%, maybe at highest 3% in terms of mortality. So much less mortality. However, it does seem to be potentially more infectious. Certainly more people have been diagnosed with having this disease.
And another problem is that you don't necessarily show the symptoms, but you may have it.
That is, again, a great question. We're still in the very early days of this, but that does seem to be the case. You can have the virus and be infected and not necessarily show symptoms. That's probably why it's potentially being spread so much more rapidly.
And you mentioned the mortality rate compared to the flu. I think they put the flu at something like 0.7%. Is that right? So it's far more lethal than the flu.
Given the numbers that we have now, yes. The question is, how many people really are infected with this new coronavirus? And I think the answer is we don't completely know.
Indeed. Dr. Fagel-Ding, we've seen a lot of people using masks in order to, prevent themselves getting the coronavirus. Do you think they are effective?
I think masks are, to some degree, effective in terms of limiting your exposure. But surgical masks are not airtight, and N95 masks are pretty rare, and they're pretty difficult to breathe. And there's such a worldwide shortage. We can't rely on masks, per se. And regarding the transmission, there's a lot of controversy whether it's asymptomatic transmitting or not.
Right.
There's Chinese reports that it might be. There was a German report, but that was retracted. I want to emphasize that was retracted recently, and it was just reported that the woman who transmitted it in Munich, Germany, did have symptoms. But there's an underlying question, and it's hard to calculate the mortality rate because we have such an underdiagnosis. There are estimates for the incidence at 7 to 8 times higher than what the Chinese government have been reporting for the past week. So the numbers are all over the place, but it's pretty clear that this has much more faster transmission and incidence than SARS.
Okay.
Lower mortality, but again, the other difference with the flu is no one has any immunity. While a lot of people, we have a partial flu vaccine, and people have partial immunity to the flu.
Understood. It makes sense. Dr. Fagel-Ding, how effective is quarantine in managing these types of outbreaks?
Well, classical quarantine is you quarantine one person or one family in a household. Lockdown of an entire city or entire province, like with 50 million, 60 million people, is not classic quarantine. You could just make it spread even faster within that area. I think the extending the Lunar New Year holiday, making sure people stay at home, I think it will slow down a bit. But in terms of spreading outside, because the WHO emergency was declared for the potential to spread to other countries, I'm not sure because there's a lot of evidence for person-to-person transmission in Hong Kong now, that of people who've never been to China who now have symptoms, and there was a mortality in Hong Kong recently of a 39-year-old.
Well, of course, it soon became evident that it was transmitted from human to human, but the World Health Organization was slow to acknowledge it. Even on January the 14th, it tweeted, "There is no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission in China." Finally, a week later, on January the 22nd, the WHO team sent to China issued a statement that there was evidence of human-to-human transmission taking place. But it was all rather low-key, not exactly ringing the alarm bell. More than a month after we recorded that show, on the 11th of March, the WHO finally declared it a pandemic. By then, there were 118,000 confirmed cases in 114 countries. Over 4,000 people were already dead. Let's turn to the race for a vaccine now, and it began in earnest in January. And a couple of months later, in March, well, that's when the scientists and Big Pharma were making very encouraging noises about when a vaccine would be ready.
The vaccines stimulate production by the body of billions of protective antibodies which build a wall. But behind it all are tests and research and years of development and hope. Simple. Is it? Is it? Is it?
A British scientist has apparently made a breakthrough in the race for a vaccine.
A team of Australians is trying to develop a vaccine.
South Korean researchers have discovered antibodies.
Researchers across the world are working to create a vaccine to tackle the novel coronavirus.
In the race to contain the coronavirus, a win for the first to cross the finish line with a vaccine or a treatment is a win for all.
Work is underway on a vaccine in a number of labs around the world.
It really is a race against time, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Pharmaceuticals giant Sanofi today confirmed it's jumped into the race
The company joins Johnson & Johnson and biotech company Moderna.
American businesses are stepping up.
The race for a coronavirus vaccine, which companies are leading the pack.
Yeah, we are comfortable that we can create a vaccine and scale it up.
We're trying to do this in, for us, what will be record-setting time.
We're going at record speed, getting into clinical trials, but that's not something that's going to impact people that are sick now or this first wave of the outbreak.
Since vaccines are given to normal individuals, what is paramount is safety and whether or not it works.
There are a lot of people that will get sick and a lot of people that will unfortunately die before vaccines become available.
The good news is we did it fast. The bad news is that the reality of vaccinology means this is not going to be something we're going to have tomorrow.
Well, let's get straight to our guests now. And we're going to be starting with Paul Mackay, a scientist working on finding a vaccine at Imperial College London. He's really at the leading edge of this global effort. Dr. Mackay, thank you so much for joining us here on The Nexus. There are a number of crucial steps in finding a vaccine. I want to just take our viewers through it really quickly. The exploratory stage, which includes gene sequencing of the virus, which the Chinese completed and shared with the world back in January. Scientists like yourself then take a part of that gene sequence, which is then injected into animals to see if the required antibodies are made. And then it's on to the 3 stages of testing in humans, numbering less than 100, then hundreds, and then thousands, and finally regulatory approval. Now, you're at the animal testing stage right now, the first laboratory outside of China to reach that stage. What results have you had so far?
So the results have been very good. We have got reasonable responses in mice, and we are also doing various different experiments in mice, and we're also testing it on in monkeys. That testing in monkeys also started this week. So we will have a good set of preclinical data very soon.
Some people will be a bit concerned that you have to test on animals, but that is an absolute necessity at this point?
It is an absolute necessity. You cannot replicate the immune system in vitro. We make great efforts to reduce the number of animals that we use, but you can't completely replace animals at this time.
And when are you likely to move on to testing in humans?
Well, we're hoping to move on to test our candidate vaccine in humans by about June.
I understand there's another laboratory called Moderna, which expects to be testing sometime at the end of this month, March, or early April.
Absolutely.
Why are they slightly ahead? What's the difference here?
So they are a large company. They have a lot of people working on the development of the vaccine. We are a small laboratory in London, and we have done it almost as quickly as they have, but perhaps not as quickly.
And people talk about, indeed we are talking about, the race for a vaccine. Is it competitive amongst scientists or collaborative?
It's more collaborative than competitive. I mean, each individual, of course, has their own competitive nature and their want and desire to make a vaccine. But scientists are by nature extremely collaborative. We collaborate with a large number of different labs and collaborations in our DNA, so to speak.
And when do you expect to have a vaccine available for the general population?
Well, I mean, as you said in your introduction, it takes quite a number of steps to make sure that a vaccine is, first of all, safe, and secondly, that it has efficacy, that it's able to generate the immune responses that you would want it to have. And those testings are absolutely necessary, and they will take approximately 1 year.
And that, to put it into context, is incredibly fast. What is the typical time it takes to find a vaccine over the past few decades?
Typically, to get to the stage of even testing it in humans has been about 3 years. And but in general, the amount of time it takes to bring a vaccine to regulatory approval is in the realms of 6 to 10 years. And 6 years is ambitious, and 10 years is more typical.
Now, obviously, the scientists, including yourself, are going at record-breaking speed, but it does mean that between now and for the next, say, 12 months or so, there's no vaccine. What does that mean for the population? They have to rely on treatments?
Yes. So, I mean, one of the interesting things about this particular virus is that there's a number of treatments which are indicated for other diseases which have already been shown to have an effect on the replication of the virus within a person. So if you can give them an antiviral drug, then sometimes that can reduce the severity of their disease and or cause the virus to replicate slowly so that the body has got time to deal with it. And there's a number of different companies which are trying out the drugs that are already licensed for use in people to see if they have this effect. So there could be treatments that are available to the population while we're waiting for a vaccine to be developed.
Dr. Mackay, thank you for taking the time out of your very busy day to explain what you are doing in the laboratory, and we wish you all the best in finding a vaccine, of course. Thank you. Well, fast forward to December, and the United Kingdom became the first country in the world to approve the Pfizer Biontech vaccine for widespread use, and has begun rolling it out to key groups, prioritising workers in care homes and in hospitals. Dr. Mackay and his team at Imperial College London are continuing with large-scale human testing and expect to have a vaccine ready soon. Of course, while the vaccine was being developed, a lot of time and money was being spent on working out the best way to treat people who had already caught the virus. We spoke to numerous doctors about various treatments, including Regeneron's RegenCov2. You'll remember President Trump describing it as a miracle when he contracted the virus back in October, just before the election. During his 3 nights in hospital, President Trump was given an experimental cocktail of antibodies called RegenCov2. He was also given a steroid called dexamethasone and a course of the antiviral drug remdesivir, plus a few other over-the-counter medications. But for the president, the star of the show was definitely RegenCov2, and he wants all Americans to have it if they need it.
It's a cure. For me, I walked in, I didn't feel good. A short 24 hours later, I was feeling great. I wanted to get out of the hospital. And that's what I want for everybody. I want everybody to be given the same treatment as your president.
Well, President Trump is clearly in a hurry, but we at the Nexus have a few questions. What is RegenCov2? We know it's an antibody, but how does it work? And is it safe? America's drug regulator, the FDA, has yet to approve it, and trials are ongoing. And if it is proven to be safe, when will people outside the United States be able to get it? And a bonus question, should we be worried that Trump plays golf with the CEO of Regeneron, the company that makes the drug?
I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it. This was a blessing in disguise. I caught it, I heard about this drug, I said, let me take it. It was my suggestion. I said, let me take it. And it was incredible the way it worked.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And joining us is Professor Dinesh Saralaya, who is leading a major clinical trial of RegenCov2 in the United Kingdom. And we also have Dr. William Schaffner, who is a public health consultant in the United States and a member of the CDC's COVID vaccine advisory group. Both professors are welcome here on the show. Thank you for joining us. Professor William Schaffner, I'd like to start with you. RegenCov2 is a mixture of 2 monoclonal antibodies. Can you just explain how that works?
Well, a monoclonal antibody is an artificially produced reproduction of what humans normally produce when they get over an infection and then are protected. This monoclonal antibody actually will neutralize the virus. That's its intention. The virus you can think of as a sphere with antigens sticking out, the so-called spike antigen. And this protein actually covers the spike antigen. The spike antigen actually is a key that goes into the lock of a cell that permits the virus to enter and reproduce and make its mischief. This monoclonal antibody actually does not permit that. The virus can enter a cell, so if a person is infected, that ought to reduce the severity of the infection because the virus can't multiply further in the body. It's a very nice theory, and we certainly hope it works.
I think we all do. Now, our bodies make antibodies naturally. What is the advantage of having this artificial cocktail of antibodies injected into us?
Well, it takes the body a bit of time, 10 days to 2 weeks, to produce sufficient antibody to be effective and to fight the virus. By providing the antibody early, shortly after infection, we would hope to abort the infection so it doesn't go on to something more severe. And there are other studies that are looking at using this antibody cocktail as an additional way to fight severe infections. So there are a couple of possibilities here for this antibody to really be an asset in reducing the severity of the impact of COVID on our population.
I just want to get on to the safety aspect here. The FDA, America's drug regulator, is yet to give it its approval. It's still at the trial stage. Isn't that incredibly risky to give the President of the United States a drug that's still in the experimental phase?
Well, obviously, there's some risk associated with that. But of course, we've been using monoclonal antibodies of various kinds for some time in medicine. So we all thought that the risk was very low. And the president received this monoclonal antibody cocktail under a compassionate use authorization. And that will permit the FDA to occasionally make an exception for an individual.
But of course, he's wanting to make an exception for all seniors who get COVID, and indeed all Americans eventually, and he wants to employ the emergency use authority in order to roll it out before it's been given FDA clearance. One prominent doctor we spoke to is all for it. I understand you're much more hesitant.
I'm much more cautious. I think we ought to let the trial run. Therefore, we will know in which patients it's effective, how effective, and we will have an affirmation, I think, of its safety. And once we know that, then we can use it in the general population with real knowledge, comfort, and reassurance.
Now, of course, Regeneron isn't the only one making this monoclonal antibody. Eli Lilly and Astrazeneca are doing the same. And we've just had news, haven't we, that Eli Lilly is pausing its own trial, which kind of bears out your cautious approach. Why do you think they might have paused their trial?
Well, it's a good thing that they've paused the trial. It shows that the system is working. We have a system in place for all trials, whether for drugs or for vaccines, such that when a serious adverse event occurs, you can pause the trial and an external group of experts can review the event to see whether it might be related to the drug or the vaccine in question. That's all to the benefit of the volunteers. We have to make sure we're not exposing the volunteers to an unwarranted hazard. It's a very prudent way to proceed.
Okay, now the president is back on the campaign trail, and he's been telling his supporters that he's been told he's immune. Let's have a quick listen.
And now I'm immune, they tell me. I'm immune. I could come down and start kissing everybody. I'll kiss every guy, man and woman, man and woman. Look at that guy, how handsome he is. I'll kiss him. Not with a lot of enjoyment, but that's okay.
Professor Schaffner, do you think he is now immune with all these antibodies in his system?
Well, the antibody certainly will provide protection for a period of time, and I suspect he is immune for at least a period of time. The duration has yet to be determined. It's likely to be weeks to maybe a month or so, maybe even 2 months. We'll see about that. The trial will tell us how long the protection actually will last.
The Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States, Nancy Pelosi, has recently claimed that the UK's medical regulations are not on a par with America's. Let's just roll that for a second.
We have very stringent rules in terms of the Food and Drug Administration here. My concern is that the UK's system for that kind of judgment is not on a par with ours in the United States.
Professor Saralea, do you agree with that?
Because of the quality of our research, they have chosen UK to be the only country to do their large phase 3 trial, recruiting 10,000 subjects, participants into the trial. We have recruited in our own center as of today 204 patients into the trial, and we hope to recruit another 300 more in the next 10 days. So the UK, I would argue, is one of the best destinations to do clinical research. I myself have a senior leadership role within the National Institute for Health Research, and I sit in the National Badging Committee, and we have scrutinized every study which has come, and decided the best therapeutics to go into our platform studies. So I would argue that the UK effort has probably been an exemplar to the rest of the world in COVID-19 research.
Professor Shafter, it's always good to get a second opinion when it comes to medical issues. Would you have any problems with a vaccine that emanated from the United Kingdom?
None whatsoever. I think Professor Saralea and his team are doing exemplary work, and we've always had great confidence. Of course, it has to go through the U.S. regulatory system also, and I'm sure it would, should a vaccine be shown to be effective.
Well, that is it for this week's edition of The Nexus. Thank you at home and on your phones for watching. And remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes again, go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.